get started actually on the definition of technology abuse, just a note about language. I will be primarily using the word survivor to talk about people who experience abuse, because we really like to come at it from a empowerment survivorship standpoint, and we're also trying to use person-first language a lot for acts of abuse, because we want to operate from a framework that even if someone has caused harm in the past, has committed abuse in the past, that they are intentionally choosing that behavior, and they can also work to not do that in the future and to change those foundational beliefs. All right, so technology abuse is a form of intimate partner violence where one person uses or misuses technology to gain and maintain power and control over an intimate partner. This is essentially the same kind of definition we use for intimate partner violence, just throughout the technology piece of it. So with tech abuse, this could be things like controlling their behavior through the use of technology as a means to coerce, stalk, or harass another person. We're really going to dive into all of the different weird ways that can happen. And I just kind of also want to note that while tech abuse is sometimes its own thing, and some of the acts of tech abuse are very distinct, a lot of just the forms of emotional, psychological, financial, sexual abuse can also be perpetuated through technology. Essentially, old behaviors, new tools. So just a note about statistics. NNEDV, the National Network to End Domestic Violence, does a lot of work. So one of their reports from 2017 noted that 97% of programs reported that abusers, sometimes I'm using their language here, misuse technology to stalk, harass, or control survivors. That 71% of abusive partners monitor their device activities, so show me your phone, let me go through your text messages, etc., etc. That 54% of the abusive partners downloaded stalkerware onto the survivor's devices, and we will talk about what that is. And then Malwarebytes is an actual partner of NNEDV, and they do a lot of work, these are an antivirus company, of course, around technology safety, and they found that there was a 780% increase in the detection of monitoring apps and a 1,677% increase in the detection of spyware on devices from January 2021 to June 2021. So it's just 6 months, right? And lastly, from the Urban Institute, about 52% of teens who are experiencing digital abuse also experience physical abuse. Now, before we get into this, because a lot of this is kind of like, hey, you should just throw out your phone, right? You should never use technology. We want to keep in mind that survivors and everyone else has a right to technology. It is not inherently a bad thing, but it is something that can be used in a positive way or a negative way. And it's very important for survivors to have access to technology because that is their window into what resources are available, into connecting with other people, into maintaining and rebuilding relationships that they have lost. So we really want to make sure that we have safe, accessible technology for our survivors. And the strategic use of technology can really add to the agency that survivors have. So we have tons and tons of resources around protecting devices and increasing that safety. And NNEDV's Tech Safety Project is, they do a lot of great work on this. This is where a lot of my knowledge on this kind of comes from. So definitely look at that if you're wanting like a ton of information. They have so many resources. All right, so what are the forms of tech abuse? And before I get started, by the way, sorry, if anyone has questions, please feel free to raise your hand, interrupt me, and ask. You don't have to save them for the end, I think, especially with this. It can be kind of easy to lose that thread, so feel free to interrupt me. So we have things like harassment and controlling behaviors, something that obviously you can do without technology, but maybe it's using text, calls, emails, social media to constantly be checking in on, texting, calling, that constant communication. Now, that's something that maybe it's like, oh, just turn off your phone, do not disturb, some things like that, but there are sometimes consequences for not responding to things. And the overwhelming nature of that constant communication can really drive survivors into feeling like they can't go out on their own. It drives the isolation piece of it. Even early on in relationships that turn more abusive or that violence increases, if there's a lot of communication going on, that's one of the ways that isolation can be started. Now, of course, we know that people can create new accounts, fake accounts. I don't know if anyone has teenagers, this might be the wrong age group. Does anyone remember Finstas? Fake Instagrams where the teenagers were posting all their party stuff? Yeah, I just used mine to complain about my college roommates. They had Twitter, I couldn't see it. So you have things like that, and it's very easy to make those new accounts. There's a few social media apps that maybe will say, oh, we can track which users have been blocked, and any new accounts that they create will continue blocking those. But not every one of them will do that. Using location data or social media posts, even uploading certain images, there can be like location information embedded in that photograph. So that way they can use that to show where people are, or at least be like, oh, I know you were at these places. Demanding to know where they are, who they're with, especially, demanding that proof with access to FaceTime, Snapchat, photos, things like that. You can increase the level of proof that's needed. Posting content either on their own social media pages or hacking into the survivor social media pages or other avenues to post embarrassing photos or information about them, intimate photos or videos, false evidence of their harmful behavior. A tactic of partners who cause harm will be to frame the survivor as the one who is truly abusive and will be, the aggressor in the situation. So that's one of the ways that they might use technology to do that. And of course, contacting family, friends, coworkers of the survivor, different tactics that they might use there. We also see that they limit access to technology. So if they, just refuse to allow them to have a phone or a computer or a private device, maybe that's by breaking the phone, maybe it's by, just taking that away, locking it in a different room, something like that. And that really leads to isolation and information restriction. Changing passwords or settings to restrict access to certain things. And this will probably come up again later because a lot of these overlap, but I was talking with a coworker of mine about some of this, and she was saying that because her children were minors, there was a lot of things that she could do to limit their access to certain websites, screen time, and see a lot of controls there. And she's like, well, this is really annoying. I just want to change their age so that way they can just do stuff that they're not supposed to as minors because now both of them don't live at home. And it's just one of those things that you don't think about how much someone could have control over it if they have access to the phone plan. Alright, let's see. Not allowing access to Wi-Fi or data, using child locks and technology, there it is. Purposely making it seem more complicated or dangerous. So kind of the way you might manipulate your 90-year-old grandmother into not getting on Facebook because you know she's going to get scammed on Facebook. Using those same scare tactics about someone's going to break into this, someone's going to see these images, they can find your data, they're going to steal your bank account information, all of those things. And then cutting off access to important accounts, just simply changing the password, changing that email location. Monitoring and surveillance is where we get really into you need technology for this. One thing you don't, obviously you need technology to do is just go through all of their interactions with people, but having access to their social media, knowing all of their accounts, or the logins to their accounts, reading their texts, calls, notes, and photos. So I actually used to work, in my previous position as a prevention specialist, I worked a lot with youth, and it was definitely something you would see a lot where they were like, well, I need your passwords to your phone. I need to be able to see all of this stuff so I can go through everything and make sure that nobody DM'd you on Instagram saying that you're cute. Because obviously, that's paramount to cheating. If somebody thinks you're cute. So it's definitely something, especially young people, are dealing with a lot, and that's very gender neutral. Manipulating smart home devices, which we're going to get into a little bit later. Smartwatch camera phones. Does anyone in here use Apple products? Have an Apple Watch on a phone? Android users, I'm not leaving you out. I'm just pretty sure you have to download a special app to do this. But if you go into your Apple Watch and you go into the camera app on it, you can actually open the camera on your iPhone and take pictures and videos from it. And you might think, okay, well that's super useful for taking group photos. By the way, it really is. But say you want to spy on someone, so you leave your phone in their room, in their car, somewhere that they're going to maybe think that they're in private. You can use that to spy on them, to take intimate photos of them, and then that way you have that for black. So that's, I think, one of the sneaky things you might not realize. accessing accounts with the survivor's name, which, depending on what that account is, different things you can do with that, especially financial. Installing stalkerware apps, again, we're going to get really into the nitty-gritty about what these look like here soon, but stalkerware can see a lot of what is going on somebody's phone, including tracking their GPS location, who they're texting, all of those things. Using location tracking, speaking again about iPhones, I guess you could also do this with Google phones. Anyone use Find My Friends? Another thing I used with my college roommates to make sure that none of them were dead after going out on a date. Or maybe you have kids and you're like, hey, I'm not going to be home for another 2 hours, so I want to make sure that you're actually in the house when you get off the bus. So we have those things, we know how we can use them, but obviously with abusive relationships, a survivor might be forced to share that location, or they're sharing that location without realizing it, because again, not that hard to do, and now that partner causing harm can follow them wherever they're going. Installing cameras or listening devices in or around the survivor's home, use of AirTags or similar devices. So have we heard about the AirTag tracking issues? The good news is that Google is, actually this summer, had launched their ability to notify you to an AirTag following you if you have an Android device. And I was able to test that actually because I rented an Airbnb that had an Apple AirTag on the key so it didn't get lost. And I got a notification about every 2 hours that an unknown AirTag was following me. There's no way to turn that off, by the way, which is good for survivors. A little bit annoying if you're renting an Airbnb, but that's definitely a positive thing that you are going to get those notifications. And then lastly, data brokers and public information. If you guys want to grab your phones, I promise I won't yell at you because you're not children in school. But you can actually Google your full name and your city location. Scroll down on that first page and see if you can find a site that has your public address and phone number listed. So we share a lot of our data online. A lot of different platforms are going to require you to kind of share that information. If you buy a house especially, that location of your house gets spread everywhere. That's why the first couple of years you live there, you're going to get tons and tons of mail around like, hey, do you need house insurance? Hey, by the way, we're going to pretend like you actually need to pay us money even though we are reaching out to you for the first time ever. And I don't know if anyone else gets this, but calls about, hey, do you want to sell your property to me? This random person who won't tell you what my name is or what company I work for. I'm going to let you guys scroll on that. Has anyone found anything yet?
I don't work some just for driving to the state of Indiana.
Ooh, that's fun. You can pay a service to remove this information online, but you have to do it regularly because it continuously gets shared. Data brokers are super obnoxious about things. So you can do that. Unfortunately, it is a paid service that you have to do kind of consistently, but it's something that can help. Public information, sometimes. My case, I don't know if anyone uses My Case, but if you're like, I think this person might have a criminal record, you can look them up on My Case. I love doing that. That's a lot of fun. Alright, so other types of things that technology can be used for would be like impersonation or fraud. So creating those fake accounts to harass a survivor, pose as them. There was someone who's a keynote speaker at a conference that I went to talked about how their ex-partner who was abusive had done this and it poses them to elicit a lot of harassment from them. And they created a bunch of fake accounts that appeared to be their ex-partners just in general, their other exes, and would harass and talk about how she was this horrible human being and how she caused all this harm. And that's like a form of abuse that can be really difficult to deal with because you can't necessarily verify if it's real or not. And you probably don't want to reach out to someone who's calling you the most heinous person they've ever met and be like, hey, is this actually your account? That's not as safe, right? Or hacking into their accounts and posting as them. Something that will probably come up again a little bit later is fake dating profiles. But I don't know if anyone's seen this. And it's a little bit hard to wade through if you just Google, like fake Tinder profile or dating profile to elicit rape. But there's been instances where someone's created a fake profile on a dating website of a survivor and then elicited someone to come over as part of a rape fantasy, essentially. And that has happened happened to people who obviously were not eliciting it, and the people who were committing the acts didn't realize exactly what they were doing at the time because they were told by who they thought the person they were engaging with that that's what they wanted them to do. So it's a little bit difficult sometimes to wade through the other instances of just catfish assaults, but it's happened. There's an SVU episode about it too in case you like, true crime shows about it. But that's something that could be there. It could be something where somebody logs into a work or a school account and sends out horrible emails or withdraws from the school because they're in those accounts. I think we can come up with a lot of different things. Spoofing phone calls is another way. We're actually going to do a demo about that in a little bit. And then opening accounts or lines of credit in their survivor's name. So this really gets into a financial abuse aspect of it, but if somebody has the login information or even just the social security number, those things that you need to open different types of credit, they can also open those accounts without the survivor knowing, or coerce the survivor into doing so with saying, I'll manage the accounts, and then they don't pay on those things, and then that ruins their credit. Then we have non-consensual intimate image sharing. So this is something that is now more widespread, embedded in our legal system to have laws against this, which is essentially in Indiana, basically the non-consensual creation, possession, or distribution of intimate images of an individual, which includes nude, semi-nude, engaged in consensual sexual activity, or being sexually assaulted. And with this, that harm is both perpetual and infinite, because once something is on the internet, obviously we know it's on the internet forever. And survivors who have experienced this often talk about how they never know when someone is going to see that again, when that's going to pop back up in their life. And we have no idea how many people that's reached. And I think just the sense of, I know there are people out there using these images for their own personal use that I did not consent to, is absolutely horrible. And again, those can be used in those fake dating profiles as well. So we can obtain those images through consensual matters. If somebody sends something to one person and they consent to that, that does not mean that they are consenting to that being distributed anywhere else. And in Indiana, that law explicitly says, unless they sent it consensually and it's password protected on that one person's device, where they have a reasonable expectation that nobody else can find this, they are not protected by that law, essentially. And that comes up here towards the end when we talk about recourse and advocacy. So, lots of different ways that we could use this, and of course, that old regular tradition of exploiting, blackmailing, and coercing survivors with that image systems like that. Alright, so I talked about a lot of things kind of really broadly. Before I go in, does anyone have questions or like, I really want you to talk more about this one specific thing? So stalkerware. I feel like this is probably one that a lot of people are concerned about. I know earlier I was talking with someone and it was like the phone thing. People constantly say, somebody's in my phone, people are reading my messages, they know something they shouldn't be, and stalkerware might be one of those avenues that somebody's doing this. So stalkerware or spyware is an app, software program, or device that enables somebody to see and record activity on another person's device. So this is something where, something like Life 360, which if you have kids, you might be using Life 360, and if you have it, you know it gives you options to see lots of things, including GPS location, you can see like what battery percentage they're on, things like that. And so it might not have to be this illegal app that you download. But sometimes survivors can know that this is on their device because we know that with the coercive control, you can kind of force a survivor into doing something to prove that they're not cheating, they're not breaking the rules, things like that. Or it could be on there without their permission, without being able to see it. Now, using stalkerware apps like this would be illegal to monitor someone without their knowledge or permission. That's, of course, where abuse gets kind of tricky, is sometimes people are consenting to something because they are under threat in that abusive relationship. And so, law is fun, right? This is why I'm not a lawyer. Now, a lot of these software apps can monitor, again, that location and that location history. One of the demos that I got to watch with this, like, had a map of where that person went for the past week. It wasn't perfect because, technology sometimes isn't that perfect, but it gives you the general idea of where someone's at. You could see who's calling them, how long they're on the phone. You can see the photos and videos, read through their messages, including other types of messaging apps like GroupMe, WhatsApp, things like that. Any notifications that they're getting, going through their contacts, seeing their screen time and activity. Watching their screen in real time is something that can happen. Listening to the audio, turning on their camera, again, taking pictures in those private spaces. Now, this is a lot more common on Android phones because Android phones tend to have a little bit more freedom and flexibility with what you can do on those phones. We know Apple's a little bit like a cult. They really like to control everything. We just now got Apple devices with chargers that are used for any type of phone. And there is a little bit of a cost, but it's not that extreme to buy these apps. So it's something where unless somebody is really, really, really broke, they probably can afford this. Now, of course, they cannot typically steal passwords, credit card information. Breaking into cloud storage is pretty difficult unless they actually have that password, or install viruses or malware on it, which is at least a little bit of a protection. And usually somebody does have to have physical access to the phone in order to install it. It's not something that can typically be installed remotely. That would be really difficult. So what platforms could we use? So Find My Friends, Google Trusted Contacts, Life360, SPAF monitoring, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, I've only read it, and Microsoft Family Safety are all apps that give you kind of a glimpse into at least some of these features that are all touted as great parenting apps. And then we have some more hidden apps, things that aren't as known or as marketed like that, but if you do like a Google search for just like spyware apps, these are going to come up immediately. So mSpy is the one that everybody agrees is the best thing to stalk somebody with. So mSpy is first. I'm not going to read all of these because I'm honestly kind of nervous I'm going to mispronounce them. Don't remember these except for advocacy use, please. Don't stalk anyone. And then there's a couple computer apps, which are a lot of times those will monitor kind of keystrokes too. So it'll be like, what are you typing, and kind of recording that. So some of the computer apps can be installed with virus/Trojan horses. So if anyone ever kind of watches something where they're like, oh, I'm going to send this link, or maybe have done your cybersecurity training, and you click on a malicious link, it might download something onto your device. That's a little bit more common with computers than it is with phones, but it's possible. And that does, of course, require a little bit more technology experience than just downloading an app and then hiding it from the home screen. This is just kind of what the home page of mSpy would look like. There's a couple more tabs, but you can kind of see that it's tracking how much time that they're spending on WhatsApp and in their text messages and different things like that. And showing who they're texting the most. There's another tab where you can actually see those messages. Including Snapchat, which is a little bit interesting because Snapchat's whole thing is that you're supposed to be able to delete stuff. It doesn't stay on there. The websites they're going to, who they're calling. I didn't want to take too much time to watch a video, and some of the videos are a little bit mediocre. But you can see a lot of stuff on this, and this is one of the ways that people could be using this to gain all of this information. Now, you don't need to do something like this. You could just have that. If you're sharing a phone plan, if you have that account information, you can see who they're texting and calling. You don't get as much information from that, but you can still be like, I know you talked to your sister this week, what did you talk to them about? And that's one of those ways that you could do that. Or if you just have their passwords. If you know what their Snapchat or Instagram password is or anything else, you can get in and read those messages without them being able to necessarily tell. Alright, spoofing. So spoofing would be like using a fake account, email, phone number to contact an intended target. So you might have seen a lot of this if you just get emails from your CEO asking if you have a quick minute to go buy a bunch of gift cards and send them the codes because they're just so busy. I've gotten a lot of those this week. But phone calls are probably what we're more concerned about, and you also probably are getting these with spam calls. And it's something that can be really easy ways for somebody to get through that phone screening. Right? When we're like, well, I don't know this number, it might be something important, it might be the doctor's office calling to confirm my appointment, so maybe I'll answer this. There's also they're a little bit more sensational, I would say, talking about if they can impersonate your trusted contact and then pretend that they've been kidnapped and harmed, is something that could happen. All right, has anyone heard of jailbreaking? Did anyone in middle school jailbreak their iPhone so that way you could get apps that were not on there? The flashlight apps? Right. So jailbreaking and rooting are both things that people use in order to install things like spyware or get more into really getting into somebody's device. And I think there's a little bit of confusion around what that is. Essentially, it's bypassing those phone manufacturer restrictions. A lot of them like to put that on there to make sure that your phones are not going to be infected with viruses, to keep your user safety, enforcing legal restrictions. A lot of things on the App Store are there because they are complying with laws around what you're allowed to do online, like having a minimum age requirement for certain apps. And then they also want to maintain a consistent user experience, which also means that you get less freedom over what you can do with that technology. So what jailbreaking does is it removes those restrictions, so that way you can have greater personalization, you can use third-party apps that might be not approved by the app stores, they're not allowed there because they break the law around it. And so to jailbreak an iPhone, jailbreaking typically refers to iPhones a little bit more. Based on what I could figure out, because I did not want to test this for obvious reasons, you basically just need to download a software on a computer, connect your phone to it, and then it will run that itself. And then from there, you can download a third-party app store and continue on your merry way. So partners across harm might do this so that way they can exploit those security gaps to hack, monitor, or damage a survivor's device. It does void that warranty, and it could actually just completely break a survivor's phone if it's done wrong or if it tries to update. So it's something that could also limit their access to technology in general. So if somebody is worried about their phone being jailbroken and now being used to track or monitor them, they might see unapproved apps like Cydia or Cylio seem to be the most popular third-party app. I'm going to move on. And then smart home devices. Does anyone in here have a smart home device at home? A couple of us? This one is a lot of fun to play with, just like what can I exploit on my own devices? So because we have an increased connectivity, that can be super, super helpful. If you're like, I'm never sure if I locked the door or shut my garage, or if my fridge the door is open because my kids are constantly opening it looking for snacks and then leaving it open, right? All of those things can be super useful. Or they can also be useful to partners who cause harm. So around security devices, these are things that people can often install to feel safer. But say a survivor has security cameras around their home. Maybe they're still in that relationship, they've just left that relationship, they put it up afterwards maybe. If somebody can get access into those accounts, which is something that can happen if they have access to an email account, if they break into that, you can pretty much reset any of your passwords connected to that email. So if they have it, obviously they can see who's coming and going from the house, they can see those daily patterns, maybe they want to break in when nobody is home, maybe they're going to use like, oh, you have this person coming around, so obviously you're cheating on me type of situations. Again, those types of abuse are just the same, we're just using technology to commit them, right? Be notified when people are coming and going. I know my camera system will tell me when there's squirrels near my garden. It doesn't do anything about it, unfortunately. We don't have that technology, but I can at least get notified when there's squirrels. So you kind of have those, and you can imagine the ways that somebody might use this to know, well, I know they're at home, so I can go harass them. I know that I can move this camera or turn off that access, so that way when I come up to the house, there's not going to be evidence of me showing up. Right? I know how to navigate this now. Or nanny or pet cams can be accessed again with that account information. I have a Furbo at home, and fortunately I don't pay for it, so I can't listen in, but I know that I can drive my partner crazy because they work from home, and I can talk through it, and I know that I can do this because they've specifically complained about me doing that. I'm like, I miss my cats. And I can see that camera, and it doesn't really show that I'm looking at the camera when you're just there. Smart locks. So smart locks can be super great if you're worried that someone can pick a lock that still has an old key, but if they can guess that code, and how many of us reuse codes or use codes like our birthday or our kid's birthday or pets or something like that. So if they can kind of guess that, obviously you can get in there. If it's controlled by your phone, like an app, if they have that account information, and a lot of that comes from sometimes stalkerware, but it could just be if they know your logins. So we're going to talk about how to protect that for survivors. And of course, if somebody's tech savvy enough, they could probably hack into it. My partner actually is a programmer, so we were joking around about trying to hack into our smart fridge to see what you could exploit with that, but I didn't have time to do that before today. So we'll see though. And then with security codes and alarms, right, if somebody knows a security code, then they can break in. I think one of the additional things here that you could do is social engineering. So if you try to go to somebody's apartment or their house and they have a security alarm and it starts going off, you don't know the code, it might not be that hard to call in and be like, hey, I'm pet sitting, this is my girlfriend's house, this is my husband set this up and I forgot the code, help me shut this off, right? And I think somebody on the other end of the alarm system might be going like, oh, you called immediately, you seem to know information about them, you're probably fine. We're just going to shut the alarm off, we're not going to notify the police, maybe we'll notify the alarm account owner, but they might not, do the emergency things that they're supposed to because of social engineering. And that's where this is harder because when somebody knows that information, it's a lot easier to break into those accounts. Thermostat, lighting, and appliances. Honestly, with this one, there's lots of different ways you can kind of imagine somebody sabotaging somebody with this. But I think really it kind of gets at the original meaning of the term gaslight, or where we get this from. So if you're not familiar, gaslight comes from originally a play turned into a movie around a husband who, actually the story is very, very intense, because I just looked up the plot of it to make sure I was right. But essentially the husband uses gas lamps and manipulates them so it keeps getting dimmer and dimmer to convince his wife that she's crazy. She's like, it's getting darker in here. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And it goes over and over again, right? So that's gaslighting. Like, if you can control your smart lights, if you control the temperature, if you can control some of those devices, and you're manipulating those settings, turning stuff off, turning things down, whatever, that might be crazy making for someone who has no idea that they're doing it, right? And then, of course, there's other things, like if it's, 95 degrees out and you turn on the heat because you have access to your Google Nest that you got for free from AES. We're up in Lafayette, so I think Duke Energy is here. I don't know if Duke Energy has one of those programs, because they didn't when I lived up here. Cool. Yeah, I got a free Google Nest from them, which is great, but that also means that someone has my account information, they can make it really, really hot or really, really cold in my house. And I would have to be there to know that's happening and try and deal with it. And then maybe it's a war, like a war between us, right? Trying to do that. Some other fun things that I could do for my phone is I can turn my washer and dryer on. I can change the settings on it, so maybe I know that's, my partner is washing their clothes, they really need it for work, I turn off the washer. Maybe I know that they're washing all their wool sweaters, and I'm like, well, I'm going to turn on the hot water for this. I'm going to make sure they go in the dryer, right? Just some fun things there. I don't have a setting turned on my fridge, but I'm pretty sure this app allows me to add things to my shopping list, which also allows me to buy stuff through my fridge. It's one of those fancy Samsung fridges, so I got a really great deal on it. I love a Lowe's clearance return. But that's something that I might be able to do, and then maybe that's financial abuse, right? If I can order stuff on your card through your fridge, right? I'm stealing money from you. So there's lots of just really weird things that somebody could be doing with access to the smart home stuff, and it's great for automation. It's great to turn my plant light on and off. But if somebody has access to this, you can kind of just see where that might be coming from. So lots of different ways. But how do we address these risks? Actually, before we go on, let's try this phone thing again. Let's see if I've waited long enough for it to go. What do you mean I'm sending calls too fast? Alright, whatever. It works. I know it does, and I know if you probably pay for it, and I don't think they're that expensive. They seem like pretty reasonable. If you play like Candy Crush and you buy stuff on it, it's probably about that. But I've definitely seen it demonstrated where you can not only have that whole contact information pop up, but you can also like change your voice on it. So I hope the demo didn't work. I was really excited for it.
It might work in that incognito browser because the website's realizing that your computer's rooted.
That's a really great point. Thank you. Alright, and I need those phone numbers again.
My phone number is 336.
It saved it. Alright, let's try this. It does not. It doesn't like me. I knew something would go wrong with the technology though, because everything always goes wrong with technology. That is the unfortunate bit. Alright. Does, by the way, anyone have any things that they wanted to add, question about? I know there's lots of things in this. So how do we address these risks? How do we go through and figure out why somebody knows these things, how somebody's getting access to it, how do we protect ourselves? So one, for anyone who is currently an advocate, they know basically how to do this. This is just another dimension of abuse to talk about with survivors. And if you are not an advocate, because I know we kind of have a mixed audience here it seems, this is still something that you could just kind of think, what are some of the weird ways that somebody might be doing something? And maybe how do we systematically go through stuff to figure that out? And some of the things that we might hear, one, if a survivor is just saying like, I know that they're in my phone, like I know that they have access to these accounts, they're reading my text messages, like I know this, then we're gonna listen to them and we're gonna kind of take that direction. But if they're just like, I don't know how they always know when I talk to my sister, I don't know how they know when I run an errand after work, even if I leave work early and I get home at the exact same time I always do. I don't know how they're doing these things. Then we're going to start being like, all right, let's explore some of the avenues that we might be experiencing here. And I think some of the things that we probably want to start with are going to be our physical and financial safety, because we know financial abuse, by the way, happens to basically every survivor. So we probably want to start with those things. I think going through the financial accounts, phone and internet accounts, and tracking devices or apps are probably the top three. I'm going to throw an email there, because email is probably your easiest way of resetting and getting access to accounts. So we want to think about, does the partner have physical access to that phone? If they have left, if they have fully separated, then we could go kind of full steam ahead, cutting off that contact. If they have not left, if they're still there, they're preparing to leave, whatever it is, we really want to evaluate if it is safe to start cutting off contact or taking back control. Because we know that the reason that leaving is so dangerous is because they are cutting off that power and control that the partner causing harm has. So any pushback there is also going to be a risk factor. So if they are still in that relationship, I'll probably say, let's get you a safe device to communicate and to kind of protect yourself there, and we're going to pretend like nothing has changed on your regular devices. Now if they've left, we'll go full steam ahead. So one of the ways that we can start looking for spyware is just go through the app list. Don't just look on the home screen, because it's really easy to hide stuff on your home screen, but then you can go into the full app list, read through anything. If there is something that does not seem familiar, we don't know what it is, we probably want to get rid of it. Maybe check out what is on there, so that way we can see, okay, this is the information I know that they can have, but we're going to get rid of it. We probably want to install an antivirus like Malwarebytes or Norton. Both of those companies are partners with ICADV, and so they are thinking about and planning for survivors in their work. Turning on auto updates is super important. Auto updates make sure that the phones are up to date with privacy and security settings, which is something that's going to help keep people from having unauthorized access to it. And a jailbroken phone is not going to automatically update, and sometimes updating a jailbroken phone can actually fix that jailbreaking. It does take a little bit for the hacking community to come up with the software to jailbreak phones or root phones on the newest update. But there is a little bit of a risk there that updating it will actually just completely break the phone. So we'll want to make sure we get anything important off of there first, just in case. And sometimes there are people who just like, I can't figure out exactly what this is, or I feel like it's just too deep, and they'll want to reset the phone entirely. And that is a great practice to use, even if we're like, I think I've solved it, or you can totally find to reset it. I will say, make sure we get off those phones, or the photos, the important contacts, maybe messages, things that like they really need to have on there. Get that onto like a file on a computer first before resetting it, because obviously we don't want to lose those important things. Yes, all right. And then we'll move on to account security. So starting with our most important things that could be, like financial accounts, email accounts, things like that. We're going to start resetting all of those passwords and settings to make sure that devices do not have access to them. A lot of accounts will let you see what devices are logged in, and then you can change those settings to log out of all devices when you change the password, or just without changing the password. And then I know at least some of them will give you access to like notify you when a new user logs into this. So that, or like somebody logs in from a new location. That way you can kind of be like, okay, somebody is getting into this, I need to do more. So really the best way of securing those accounts though is to use secure really difficult passwords. And the easiest way for people to do that is getting a password manager. Some of these are both free and then have a low cost. I personally use Bitwarden, and it's $10 a year. And that will auto-generate strong passwords that will take, I think the last time I looked it up was like 1 billion years to force break it. So it's something that's going to be really secure. It manages every single one of your logins, so you don't actually have to remember anything but like one long difficult password, which you can have written down somewhere. You could just, usually like a sentence, like a weird sentence is a way of doing it. You want to avoid like the names of your kids or your pets or something like that, obviously, because that's something we know about them. But having that password manager is super helpful in general, but I would recommend that. Using multi-factor authentication for anything, so that's text, call, email. YubiKeys are just little devices that you can like have that multi-factor authentication sent to you. Press the button, it lets you log in. Obviously, that's a little bit annoying sometimes because you always have to have that little device with you, but it's an option in case we're worried. Changing phone numbers and screening calls can be really important. I basically don't answer the phone for any number that calls me that I don't have a contact for. But changing that phone number is probably going to be really helpful in at least keeping somebody from spoofing calls that mimic the accounts that we have. Updating privacy settings on all social media accounts to limit that outside access. So with this one, a lot of times we're like, well, if I just block the one person who I think is an issue, then it'll be fine, but there's, who knows, how many people on that friends list or follower list is in contact with a partner causing harm, and that could get access back to them. So having a fully private account, really cleaning up that friends and follower list, or maybe even just making a new account if that's easier. I made a new Facebook account after I graduated from high school because I just had too many people on there, and I was like, I don't know any of you, and I'm not deleting this, I'm just making a new one. And don't feel bad about blocking people. It's totally fine to block people. It seems like an egregious sort of thing to do, but I feel like it's for safety. Block people, who cares? So one thing too with creating new accounts is that a lot of times they have this wonderful thing to help you find your friends by connecting your contact or your phone number or your mutual friends. So we want to make sure we're going through all those settings and turn those off and making sure that people can't discover us by that. There's a limit to how far we can do that. I think sometimes with social media accounts, which is again why it's sometimes just important to preemptively block people if you can. I will recommend one known method of communication to document all of that contact between a survivor and their partner. Of course, if we can totally cut off contact, that's great, but we know most of the time survivors have reasons that they have to be in contact. Maybe it's a divorce, shared property, children especially. So having a secure form of communication to document that contact. There's a couple parenting apps that help with this that we can use. And then there are encrypted and secure messaging platforms. Apple's messaging is actually encrypted end-to-end, which basically means you can't really intercept them. Signal is another really popular way of doing that, and that can kind of just help keep people from seeing this outside of permission. Responses to the non-consensual incident image sharing. So our criminal code here, 354548, is basically when a person knows or reasonably should know that the individual depicted in the image does not consent to the distribution of that intimate image, yet distributes it anyway. So yeah, if somebody has it on a personal password protected storage thing, technically does not cover it, although if they obtain that without consent, it can. And this is a misdemeanor, but it's just barely below the felony. And ICADV.org is basically dedicated to solving this, or at least assisting survivors. And so one of the preventative measures that you can take is to hash an intimate image, which is kind of just like adding a watermark, like an invisible watermark to it. And then if that image gets uploaded anywhere, any site that is working in tandem with ncfli.org will be able to flag it, remove it, and notify the user. So it is something that is like an extra step we can take for privacy and prevention measures, because I can't remember the exact statistic, I think it was 88% of adults say that they have shared private images over text or probably in an email. That would be really weird, but most people have, right? And so we know, like, other than hiding your face and other marks that can identify you, this is another way that could help. With surveillance, looking for any suspicious object or objects who are gifted by the partner causing harm. So if they're like randomly come home one day with a teddy bear and then all of a sudden they know exactly what that survivor did all day, probably want to start there. Some of the ways that we can kind of scan for it is by turning off all the lights, and you scan with like a flashlight or a phone camera, and you might see an LED. You might be able to check your Wi-Fi network for anything any devices that are connected to it. Also just kind of good for anything in general to see who's connecting to your Wi-Fi. Checking for signal interference in phone calls. Sometimes if you're like on a phone call and you're walking near one of those hidden devices, you'll get a little bit of a sound in it. Sometimes there's hidden camera detector apps or devices that can help scan for these things. They're often kind of hidden in things like, picture frames, light bulbs, smoke detectors. Anything that's known as a secret nanny cam, things like that would be a really great thing to check for first of all. The two-way mirror thing is a little bit difficult to figure out, because I know we've all seen, like, if you press your fingernail up to it and if there's a gap, then it's a two-way mirror. But that also doesn't really work sometimes, because sometimes the mirror is just backed up against a wall and it's a two-way mirror. That one's a little bit weird, but yeah. So things like that are ways that we can check for surveillance, other than obviously protecting those accounts when we have that surveillance number. And then location sharing. So checking in all of your devices, like, where are you sharing your location with? Are you sharing it on Find My Friends or the Google Contacts app? Are you sharing on Twitter, X or Instagram or Facebook or whatever it is that you're sharing on? Is your location being tagged there? Are you checking in on, nobody uses Foursquare anymore, but maybe you still do. Scanning for tracking devices. So one, your phone's going to alert you if there's something like that. No, mostly an AirTag, right? Or some of those more common ones that people use. But if there's something where they're getting a tracking device that doesn't come up with that, we can start scanning for that with third-party apps usually. The Tile app also has a scan and secure feature in their settings. So if you're like, well, I'm not buying an Apple AirTag obviously, but I can get Tiles, you can also scan for that with that app. And then if we know that there's physical access, or we suspect that there could be physical access, checking like purses, wallets, going through the car, looking at the seats, on the tires, around that, kind of those common ways that somebody might be sticking stuff in there. Behind the license plates also, because they're not totally flush to the back of the car. And that's something that we're probably going to be checking for more so if it seems like they can always show up wherever the survivor is, or they know where they've been, or something like that. That's probably more so when we're going to be really scanning for that. With mostly computers, and you can do this on your phone, I think it's a little bit harder. You can get a virtual private network or a VPN. There are free ones, although the paid features, and again, not too expensive, and something that you can actually share with a friend if you have if it seems a little expensive, they give you multiple devices. You can share that cost with a friend, and then that way everyone can have that VPN access. That actually really helps with that digital footprint of tracking. So basically an IP address is something that can link whatever is being posted or shared with that device, and that's how people track someone. I'm a little bit bad sometimes with explaining technology, things like this, but that can digitally bounce into different places. The nicer apps or software programs are going to bounce it in multiple places, and then so it always maybe looks like you're in Chicago or LA or somewhere else rather than where you actually are. I know I had a free one just to get around the Wi-Fi blocks in high school called BetterNet. I'm pretty sure it still exists. So even if you're just like, I'm going to dip my toe in with this one, that is an option. And then, like I said earlier, getting those data brokers to remove that personally identifying information. Unfortunately, a paid service, but something that could be really helpful for at least a while. Let's see, how am I doing on time? Doing all right. So how can survivors use this to their benefit? Because I just said a lot of different ways that somebody can get access and then do really weird things. So with cameras and alarm systems, those can be helpful, right? Just because they could be broken into doesn't mean that they're bad. So if they can install cameras around their home, that can increase their sense of safety. This does not always translate into a sense of safety, especially for survivors who are used to being surveilled. So we want to be conscious of their personal experiences with this. Right, but it can make them feel safer. It can document any time that person is violating a protective order, showing up unannounced, uninvited, that harassing behavior. If they have a camera or alarm system, it can ensure, we want to make sure that we're using all the security protections that we can, especially that password manager, maybe having a new email account that they have no idea about in order to, like, it's harder to break into somebody's email account if you don't even know that it exists. And then the alarm systems, there's lots of different entry points for this. Obviously, there's some really expensive ones out there that are monitored by another service. But there's also some that just make a noise. I know that I have one that just makes this really, really loud, annoying noise if the door is open while the thing is on. So that's something that we could use that's a low cost to it. But there are more impressive ones, and that increases some safety there. I will say, I think right now it's a little bit up in the air, but Rain Cameras were doing this program where they were donating a lot of devices. I think that just ended, they just ran out of devices, but I think they're in talks to do this again. So fingers crossed that they'll do that, but that's something that can be really helpful. You really just have to pay for the cost of the device, for the monitoring of it. Can be very helpful. The Internet of Things. So this one is interesting. So you can automate when your lights come on, when certain things happen, which means you can pretend to be home or do different patterns of your daily activities when you are not actually doing those things. So if you want to make it look like you're coming and going at different hours of the day, so that way they can't figure out what that pattern is, that's super helpful. And that counter surveillance, even if they're still living together maybe, if the survivor can counter surveil something, they can document incidences of abuse that later helps them with protective orders or legal cases. They can have greater control over their utility use to reduce bills. That one's really, really interesting. So some of the things that I didn't talk about earlier is that, actually I know Duke Energy does this because I did this a lot in college as I was a college student. I could track my daily energy use, and then that way I could tell, like, am I using too much electricity? What are ways that I can actually reduce this? And then I can reduce my bill. I know that I'm pretty sure I can still do that. Actually, that SmartThings app that I have, which allows me to control my washer, dryer, and fridge, also lets me see my energy usage. Of course, if the partner causing harm has access to this, that's a way that they can weaponize that kind of abuse against them, which is, I mean, you could do that without technology too, because you can come home and see that the fan is on and scream at somebody because how dare they use the fan? It costs so much energy to use a ceiling fan. This is a real example. I have actually had someone be mad about that in the past. So you could just do that without technology, without knowing the actual usage of it, or you could come up with a fake thing of, or you can use technology to see the real daily technology use. But anyway, you can use this to reduce your bills, which is fantastic. The smart lock thing, if you know that somebody can make keys or pick locks, protects against that. The other thing with this is you can give more people the code to it. without necessarily having to get keys made, which can sometimes be a lower cost. Not that it costs that much to get new keys, but it sometimes can be a little bit easier, or you don't have to have personal contact with that person to give them a key. And that can increase safety. If you know that your neighbor can watch out for you, or that survivor, and intervene or call the cops, come over, in case of emergency, that can be very important. Documenting abuse, so NMEDB, they're techsafety.org. This is their website that has tons and tons of information. They have a sample form to document incidences of tech abuse and abuse in general, which can just be really helpful to keep in mind what you need. Taking screenshots, and especially screen recordings. So screenshots can be manipulated, or with the screen recordings or videos of something, it's a lot harder to doctor that, and so you can kind of show that. Password protected or an encrypted storage vault of evidence will be super, super helpful for survivors. The more documentation that they can have, the more important that is for protective orders, for court cases, for custody battles. If the partner causing harm is using those fake accounts or known accounts to harass somebody, but especially fake ones, they're probably not using a VPN. They might not even know about it, so can get access to their IP address to prove that it's them. That can be another way of documenting an abuse. And then reporting online harassment to the website itself. If they know that this account or these accounts linked to the same person has been repeatedly harassing one person, they can be subpoenaed for that. Depending on the company, they might be more willing to cooperate than others, but let's see. So we'll just, as a side note, again for advocates, you already kind of know how to do safety planning. We'll just incorporate this into those plans. This has the potential to increase the knowledge of community resources, to increase that connection to trusted contacts. Leaving abusive relationships is really hard, not just for everything else going on, but also because of that loss of support system. One of the projects that ICADV does is around survivor loneliness and that disconnect from a community when they leave those programs. So save documents or records. So things like, not birth control, that's not what I'm thinking of. Birth certificates. Sorry, once I start talking for a while, I start losing words. Birth certificates, financial documents, deeds, all that type of stuff. And then lastly, some of the things that we could do to help survivors maybe have safe contact is maybe kind of weaponize those fake accounts against it. Oh, and when I say weaponize, I mean that really, really gently. Because you can get a Google number in order to harass somebody, but you can also get a Google number to protect your actual cell phone from being contacted. You can use messaging apps like GroupMe or something else. So again, that phone number is not associated with the actual survivor, and they can delete that app at any point. Having like a fake account, just something that's totally disconnected from your regular emails, passwords, anything else like that, again, keeps all of that separate. Even spoofing, I would say probably don't spoof a phone call unless you've exhausted your other options for safe contact, because that gets into a little bit of a legal gray zone. You're not allowed to use spoofing to harass anybody. But it's like, I have exhausted all of my avenues and I have to safely contact this person because of whatever reason, you know, that happens. Having a spoof phone call maybe can be a little bit helpful to at least protect that original phone number. Okay, cool. I actually did finish in a perfect amount of time. I was very worried about that. So if anyone has questions, comments, just wants to rail against the general use of technology, I am here for that.